Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by RoderickE. This you're in for a treat here, ladies and gentlemen, because Roderick's got a completely different take, I think, which I really love, and we're going to explore. But welcome to the show, Roderick. Looking forward to spending some time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you from across the pond.
Yeah. So Roderick's an adoptee and a prolific author, right? So how many books have you written? 20 books, is it? Is that right?
I think it's up to 25 now. Yes.
25. Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow. So as I was thinking about how we start this conversation off, I spotted something that Roderick had put on. I commented he'd put on like Facebook today. So I came up with this sentence last week, I think, or this morning or something, and it was: there may be lots wrong in our story, but there's nothing wrong with us, and this central issue that we have as adoptees, that there's something wrong with us, and I'm always trying to point us in the other direction to what's right with us. Now, Roderick put it underneath. He says, as a determinist, everything happens for a reason, so therefore nothing is wrong. And I thought, what a great point, what a great way to kickstart the conversation. So what do you mean by that? What's determinism, and why did you say that?
Well, first of all, as you said, a lot of times adoptees feel like we're damaged goods, and ultimately, for whatever reasons, our parents got rid of us. They let us go, so something's wrong with us. We think that we're wrong. A determinist is somebody who believes everything, as I said, happens for a reason. It's not random chance. There's some force, if you want to call it God, the universe, whatever you want to call it. There's some reason why things happen. So I try to use the word negative and positive. So instead of wrong, I'd say negative things happen. Negatives aren't necessarily wrong. They're just not pleasant necessarily, like war. Sometimes war has to happen so you can get to peace. And if it doesn't happen, you have a stalemate, sort of like North Korea is going to constantly be a thorn in our side until it's dealt with at some point. It's just a reality. So therefore, as a determinist, sort of like when people say, karma will get you in the end, as a determinist, you believe that even the bad things we go through, the negative things we go through, have some kind of purpose. If we focus on the fact there's a purpose in it and we need to figure out what that purpose is, then we won't dwell on the fact that it's negative so much. We won't dwell on the fact it's wrong, So that's what I'm talking about.
That's where you're coming from. Wow. Because Roderick was actually, you were left for dead, right, at the hospital?
Yeah, I was left for dead at the hospital. They didn't think I'd survive. I was born with I can't remember the name of it. It's gastro something dysocius, where your insides are basically on the outside. So I probably looked pretty gross at the time, and I was premature, 5 pounds. Probably didn't look like I was going to make it at all. So I was left for dead. And when we'll get to this further, but when I did make reunion with my birth family, they were surprised I was even alive. So
wow. So this, if nothing has a random chance, nothing is random. Why do you think you've kind of been through all that stuff?
Well, something I've noticed about adoptees is because we're kind of disconnected from the familial cultural concept. A lot of times we have more objective perspective on things. And as a writer, that's a really important skill. And I've always loved writing and being able to understand and tell stories. So being an adoptee, maybe the universe said, hey, we need to make this guy as objective as possible. Remove him from those familial ties. You've heard that whole, blood's thicker than water. Well, when you have none of that at all, you're really objective.
Yeah.
So
does that make you too tough though? I mean, I'm just like, does it?
It definitely makes me different. I mean, some people will say, well, he's heartless, but I'm not heartless. I love puppies. I love kittens. I love all those things. I love little kids. But at some point, because I talk so sometimes in realities, start cold reality, sometimes people come off thinking I'm heartless, but I'm definitely not. I just want to get to the heart of what things really are sometimes.
Yeah. So before we started recording, you mentioned the Primal Wound book, and I'd be interested in your objective view of that? Because I've got an objective view of that, or maybe it's subjective. Who knows? I never I get the English wrong, right? I'm not a writer like you.
No, ultimately everything is subjective, but it's the further you can realize your own biases and admit to them, the better you are. Unfortunately, when people say I'm unbiased, no, nobody's unbiased. We all have our outside influences. I get that. So the primal wound is the epitome of, I think, almost a narrative that either we apply to ourselves as adoptees or adoptees applied to them. Where again, that whole damaged good thing. I don't feel myself as damaged goods. I feel like I'm different, but I don't feel damaged per se. And I think the primal wound and some of these adoptee conferences that I've been to, it's all about how traumatized we are. And I get that. I'm not negating that. I'm not downplaying it. There we go through stuff, but if you live there, you're stuck there.
Yeah. Yeah, we all want to be unstuck. So, my objective view or subjective, whatever it is, my view of the primal wound is that, I read it and I thought, this kind of explains everything. For me, there was a relief in the diagnosis. And that's what I think it is. It's that validation. We're as human beings, right? We're looking for validation. We hang around with people that agree with our opinions. So, and it's like, so it made absolute sense to me. And I thought, well, I have felt at times in my life that I felt wounded, right? But I got into kind of like an objective question later on, which was, well, what's wounded, right? And I make this distinction between I have felt wounded, but I'm not my feelings, right? Feeling one thing doesn't necessarily make it so. Now, and as I say that, I think Simon is split. I think I'm splitting my words here, but what's your take on
right? So that's an important part. We talked about that a little bit when we're talking about objectivity and the disconnection from familiar. There is a thing such as emotionalism. And obviously, humans have emotions, anger, but if you operate on emotionalism, where everything has to be filtered through your feelings, you're not going to get a very clear picture. Because again, you said it's not really you; it's a feeling. There's objective truth, things that actually just are, and things that you might feel like. You look at the blue sky and you see it's blue, but it might actually cause some kind of feeling in you. That's not what it really is. It's blue, if that makes sense. And so I think what happens in these primal wound is you do see that there's something there for you. You can feel it. And to me, what it is we've lost our personhood. As adoptees, we have no sense of heritage. And that's the primal wound. That's the thing that hurts us. It's not just rejected by our parents. It's rejected by everything. We are nobody until we figure out who we are. Now I know that teens in general go through that. They try to, they rebel against their parents, even ones that know their parents. But adoptees have to me, a more keen sense of this I'm no one. Who am I? Kind of concept. And to me, that's the wound.
Okay. So when did the who am I question come to you?
Oh, again, I always knew I was adopted because you couldn't tell me I wasn't, because I remember all the way back to age 3 when I was being taken to my adoptive parents' house.
Yeah.
And so I've always thought, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And really probably never figured that out completely. I call it the constructed life. At some point I decided, okay, I'm going to make myself someone. And I did construct a life. And it was really, really protected. But I didn't really figure out who I am until I found my birth family.
Right. So your identity is related. Your identity was at one point it was constructed, and then it was shifted, and you found it as part of the birth family.
And probably still trying to. I mean, there's probably still parts of the construction, but some of it's now organic. It's true. It's actual heritage based on that. And again, since I was never raised by the parents and they've deceased before I met them, I have to fill in the gaps by stories. And so it's still constructed a little bit, but there's at least some elements of truth to it instead of just stuff I make up and be someone.
Yeah. So how was that impact from something that you built to something that you found? Would that be a good? Just
Yes, and what I built was very consistent because obviously, as adoptees at least I was very chaotic in my thinking. I tried to keep that contained so I didn't seem like a crazy person to other people. But in my thinking and who I am and how I relate to the world, it was very chaotic. So on the outside, I made sure I was as consistent as possible. I mean, predictable to the point where I was almost boring because people knew here's what Rod would say, here's what Rod would do. In this situation, Rod would behave this way. And I wanted that because I wanted people to see that in me. Uh, but when I found my birth family, a lot of it just went out the window and people thought I had went crazy. And maybe in some sense I did, but it let go of all that fakeness in a way, that fake cohesion I had going on.
yeah. So that, I mean, the fake word's a good one, isn't it? Because in the personal development, as I spent a lot of time hanging around in the personal development world, and people say things like "fake it till you make it," and
Yeah.
I'm like, well, who wants to deal with the fake? Like, I don't want a fake friend. I don't want a fake relative. I don't want
Fake life.
I don't want a fake life. No, I mean, I don't want I don't want to buy something off somebody who is a fake, who is, smiling as they take my order for the pizza and
Well,
then
look,
spitting on it as they bring it out,
right. Look at celebrities. A lot of celebrities, we look at their lives like, oh, I wish I had that life. Look how much money and fame they have. And then they end up committing suicide or dying because they're probably living a fake life and they realize it and it's not fulfilling. So I look at Michael Jackson and Prince and some of these other people who have gone from us because their lives didn't turn out the way we thought they were. So
Yeah. I think about that a lot, that have you heard that Jim Carrey quote, something like, I wish everybody could be rich and successful so they realize it's not what it's cracked up to be.
exactly.
Yeah. It's almost as if they find the people that I often think about LA and film stars and the singers that you're talking about, but especially the actors who, because they fake a different identity.
Like Robin Williams, when it comes to mind, definitely. I mean, he was always cracking up and comedian, and you think he's such a happy-go-lucky guy, but he at the end there, he told you, look, I've been a manic depressive all my life. So
Yeah, yeah, and I think of them like they're waiting tables, and they're waiting for this big break to happen, and then suddenly it works out, and it doesn't deliver them what
right.
what they want to deliver them, right? And that's when the existential angst comes in for the likes of Michael Jackson, or the one that came to mind is Heath Ledger. Those they get it's not as good. They their expectations aren't met.
Yeah. Which might be a good launching point to talk about reunions in general. I don't know when you're ready to get at that, but that's because we do, as adoptees, we have this delusion of how our reunions of our birth families might go. And sometimes they don't go that way.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so you said that you went from a constructed fake life.
Yeah.
So what happened next? What happened after reunion? How did things shift for you?
Let me back up just a little bit in case other family members. When I say fake, I don't mean that I didn't care about that was going on in my life. I didn't truly love and care about and try to do things I did in my life. I'm just saying they were more of a construction. They were a pattern.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I was using shorthand. Yeah.
Right, right. I must make sure that people understand that because if anybody watches, oh, all that didn't matter. Yeah, it did matter. It does matter. So the Indiana where I was from originally changed its laws about 2017 or so. And if you submitted documentation, your birth family also agreed to it, or they were deceased, you could get your birth records completely. Your last name and everything. Well, I did that. Now, all through the years, even before the internet, I had looked but never found anything. I would always look and say, oh, maybe that person, maybe that person, but it never amounted to anything. So here is 2017, and I finally get a letter back with my birth certificate. Now I just said Mel and my last name, my last biological name, and then my mother's information. So I wasn't even given a name at birth. I had no name.
Wow.
So this was a wake up moment. And fortunately, in the internet age and the age of social media, I was quickly able to locate that last name and find some birth relatives. obviously I told you before, my
Yeah.
mother and father were deceased.
Yeah. So, you're going from this constructed world, the constructed identity, into something where it is more organic and true to you,
Yeah.
and it's true to your birth family. What did that look like?
Well, it started off with obviously one of the relatives, it was a half sister, telling me all about my mother, telling me how she did have issues with the fact she gave me up and also gave up another sibling of mine. We'll get into later maybe, but so telling me all about my life and seeing how it worked, and that changes because you again, most adoptees have delusions as to why they were given up and who their parents were, and so I'm beginning to see, and sometimes it's something might not want. You might your mother was a drug addict, or maybe she wasn't a drug addict, or maybe you're a victim of rape. All these things you got, if you're going to do this, you have to be prepared for anything. Unfortunately, mine was just more that she was just a young woman that was had babies by multiple men, and this is what happened. So,
Yeah,
uh, so, and so it starts to come together as to who I am, but it's also making issues with who I have created myself to be. Who am I and who did I create myself to be? There's a conflict started happening, and even though some people try to be supportive, they could not be as supportive as they needed to be because I was internally acting crazy. And a lot of people say, well, you need to go to counseling. I don't know about you, but the counselors that I have experienced, they're just as messed up as I am. So I'm not certain. I just needed somebody to talk to. It doesn't matter whether it's a person or a friend or a counselor. I'm not certain I want to pay for anybody because sometimes they'll mess with your mind trying to get you to go someplace you really don't even want to go. So,
yeah. So there's a fundamental mismatch, though, yeah, and
right. There's
that's why
definitely a
there's the
fundamental
chaos.
mismatch.
Yeah. So you'd gone from chaos, and then you'd built some consistency, and you constructed a identity, and then everything's thrown up in the air, and you're back to the chaos, and that's the start of bringing it back together, I guess, is it?
Right. And then you have to decide what pieces from the constructed life are really you, because some of those are really you, and then bringing them into the other part and say, okay, now who am I now? And trying to put those pieces together and reconstruct yourself. At least that's how I did it.
Yeah. And how many years have you been in that, or how many years ago did you start that process?
2017 is when it all started. So we're not too many years down the road, 5 years or so.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I'm still working through it. But the thing about it is a lot of people, some people thought I went completely crazy, some of the closer people to me, and then so the people who kind of knew me, they would interview me almost. They'd call me up. Oh, no, he seems the same old Rod we've always known. Because, like I said, there were some pieces that were definitely me organically, even in the constructed life, and some pieces that came over. And there's some parts of me that are completely different. If you said, hey, Rod would never do this or behave this way, you're like, oh, no, that guy would never do that. Well, now I do.
right, yeah. So it's. Did you use the word integration? It sounds like that's a theme for it, really.
Yes, integration of those two pieces.
Integration, but it's like a conscious choice.
Right. But some of this you don't know what is you. Like I said, I don't know which parts were really me that I constructed and which parts aren't. I know I have boiled down my I guess you want to call it morality to two things which have been consistent in my life and continue to remain is as I like to be honorable, whatever that means, it's subjective, and honest, which obviously honest is subject as objective. You're always honest, just don't tell lies. So I try to be honorable. Somebody you could say, well, this guy's not going to cheat me, no matter what it might be, or this guy's going to be honest. I try to put those two things in my life and have been consistent through both parts of who I am.
Yeah, and how does that play out with your birth family?
Well, one thing I wrote a book, as you see all there, I wrote this book.
Yeah,
It's called Together More. This is the book basically just kind of laying it all out as to who I was and where I went through. And I was a bit too honest in that book. And unfortunately, some of the people from my adoptive life got their toes stepped on and got hurt their feelings. But I had to get it out. And maybe if publishing it wasn't a great idea, but it's there now, and I don't like to retract. And so, anyhow, my birth family has seen this guy who is completely honest, who will talk about things directly, who will not beat around. First of all, I tell them all the time, it's like, look, I got 50 years because I'm 55 now. I have 50 years of time. I don't have time to make up and cajole and all this stuff. I'm just going to tell you straight out these things. And so sometimes it might come off a little brash, a little hard, but I think they appreciate it now. At first, they were like, "Whoa, you can't say those kind of things. We don't want to reveal those yet."
yeah,
So
yeah. So that's the honesty piece, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
the honesty piece, and in the honorable is the fact that I try to keep my word and do the things I say I'm going to do. So
yeah. That's it's weird. Like it's not well, it's not weird, but it's not you know that everything happens for a reason. There is an so I'm 56, right? But you're 55. There's so many people come into onto this podcast, right? They come into my world that are around that age. You know, 1 or 2 years younger, 1 or 2 years older, and then even birth mums come in, you know, like there's a birth mum who come on and they had their son in the same year as I was born.
I think also what you're seeing maybe is the fact that there's something about certain ages. Obviously, like when you turn 20, you're done being a teenager ultimately. I mean, if maybe you've been a teenager all the way up to age 20, even though you're no longer in your teens. By the time you're 30, you're usually thinking, well, I need to really think about my career, my success. When am I going to have a family? By the time you're 50, you're like, okay, I'm going down the other side of the hill. So you're going to try to wrap up loose ends. So I think a lot of times whether you're birth parents or adoptees, you're trying to figure out how to wrap up your life because you know that it's within 20 to 30 years lifespan of most humans, it's coming to an end. And
Yeah,
so speaking about that, now I told you there was another a birth kid that was given for adoption. That was my sister, and I located her shortly after, probably a year after. They said that hey, the birth family said there was another child given up for adoption, and she's your older sister by 2 years. Now it said that on my birth certificate. It said you're the last child born, blah blah blah. And so nobody knew where she was. So I did all my tracking down because I'm a data analysis by analyst by profession, but couldn't find her because they changed her birth date. So finally, eventually, I hired a confidential intermediary, which is a private investigator for adoptees, if anybody knows that, and they eventually located her. Well, after more research and finally DNA tests and everything else, we found out we were the only two 100% biological siblings. The rest of them are half siblings, which are still siblings, but we were the only two. Oddly enough, the only two also given up for adoption.
wow.
Yeah, and so eventually, here's the part that really caused the chaos. I decided to spend the rest of my 20 years of my life with her, with my biological sister. I haven't known you for 50 years. I see this connection with you. I want to get to know you more. So that really upset the apple cart because that's,
You mean you're living together?
yes, we're living together, and obviously just a brother and sister, but
Yeah.
I moved to another state, Florida altogether. So that really, that's the chaotic part that really people say, what in the world is Rod doing? Well, I only have 20 years left. I just want to do this. I spent 50 years with the rest of you, and I'll still interact with you, but this is what I want to do. Can I do this? And a lot of them just say, no, you can't. You're crazy. Why are you doing this? And they're still thinking. Some of them are still thinking. Some of them have come around. Okay, this is what he wants to do. It's fine. But some of them have not.
Yeah, but I guess you're honourable and honest, so you're going to do what you say you're going to do.
Right. And
Yeah,
I'm going to do what I'm going to do. So I did it. And everybody's still available to come in my life, but I'm not going to regret my decision because I think it's a good decision.
yeah, yeah. It's you know, we talked about the age thing, and tying up loose ends, but you know, after the age of 50. But it's very important to me that people do what they say they're going to do,
Right.
because I do it, and therefore I expect it of others. And same with the honesty. I do it, so I kind of expect it of others.
Right.
But so it doesn't always play out very well for me.
No, no. Humanity, if you get it, humanity, and it's fine. I don't talk too much about religion or anything, but morality in general. Humanity is by nature, I guess every creature by nature is self-sustaining or self-sustaining. So basically, we want to survive. We will do anything to survive. And when it comes to some human beings, that means lying, cheating, whatever they have to do to survive. And even though we might not like that, it makes sense because you're a creature and that you're going to do whatever it takes to survive in any situation. So you got to understand that. And that's how in some of my books, I talk a lot of philosophical stuff in a lot of these books. So I get to that point that I understand that this is what a lot of people do. I don't necessarily hate them for it or dislike them for it. I understand them for it.
Yeah. So was that the expectations thing. We can look at it in terms of expectations in reunion. Well, let me ask you. So, when did you move in with your sister then?
Well, that's the I knew her for about 6 months or a year before that happened, because I mean, there was lots of things we began
Yeah,
talking a lot. And I actually had a biological aunt, and I also obviously have the 4 or 5 other half siblings as well. So, but there was just some connection with the biological. Now, some people will say that you shouldn't do that. That's you're seeing. I understand all the counseling. I get that, but
so
there's something.
how long have you been living under the?
Uh, 4 years now, I think.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, about 4 years.
yeah. So you must have had time to wrinkle out any things. It's worked out, or else I guess you wouldn't have.
Yeah,
Still,
yeah. There's lots of things because it's not. I don't. There's some connection beyond the fact that we're just biologically. We also have the same philosophies and ideologies, even though we weren't raised together. We weren't raised the same. I mean, according to the outside influences, we should have been completely different. So I always joke. I was like, okay, so imagine if we were raised together, would we still have the same connection? And I think we would have been the two closest siblings. I don't know how big your family was. When I came from my adoptive family had 5 altogether. And at some point, 1 or 2 of the siblings, you could tell they were closer to each other than the other ones. So I have an adoptive brother I'm closer to than my other adoptive siblings. So it just happens that way.
Yeah. So the
Did I stump you?
you did, yeah.
Good.
How did you like when you started engaging with other people in the adoptee community? I'm thinking, how did you feel when you realized how different when your opinions were different to theirs?
Well, the first eye opener of that is I went to an adoptee conference. This is before I even found the biological sister. I knew she existed, but I hadn't found her yet. And maybe I think I can help get support through here. But the entire conference was, woe is us, adoption's unfair, adoption should be made illegal. Well, guess what? I don't care till the end of time. At some point, somebody, for whatever reason, will going to have to not raise their child. What do you want to what do you want to happen to these children? If they're not adopted, what will happen to them? So there was some unrealistic things they were saying, and to me, they seemed bitter and like they were the primal wound. They weren't getting over any of it, and it just wasn't placed for me. I was never there. I've never been a woe was me type person anyhow. I always been I'll figure it out. We're going to go forward. We're going to get through it. So it just really turned me off to that entire thing, and so I moved away from that and started looking for some other outlet.
Yeah. When I see the stuff about changing the world, and changing the adoptee world, I often think, well, I'm more interested in me. I want. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm fascinated by having a better life myself.
Right, self-preservation. We talked about that before.
Yeah, it's self-preservation. It's almost like I feel that I'm not really ready enough to go and change the world, or it's not my karma, dharma, or whatever you say, to go and change the structures or stop adopting happening. Because, as you say, like you can. There's this dogmatic approach, right? Well, let's just stop it, or let's change it, or and then you're into a whole minefield, and you're trying to change the way that the whole thing is set up. And I think this comes down to, for me, it comes down to the fact of I used to have a small publishing company with like 5 staff, and I couldn't get them to take it where it was going, where I wanted to go. I struggled with. I didn't feel that I was a good leader, and I couldn't change the business fast enough. And I think, well, if I can't cope, if I can't change my own little business, then how am I supposed to change? Like,
on top of that, we're always telling you hear like college commencement speeches, and whoever gives them, they're always saying, "You go out and change the world." Well, that's not necessarily always our goal, anyhow. Sometimes there's certain things that are okay with the world are already fine. what if instead of change the world, like you said, change yourself? And if the world changes around you, so be it. But it's
Yeah.
not always our goal to change the world. And some things are with the world aren't even broke. Now, if I was going to change some things as an adoptee, maybe I would say at age 18, your record should be completely open. But also think about the hypothetical problems with that. What if you were a product of rape? What if the parent is a really bad parent, and when you come across them, they are in prison or a drug dealer or something? Do you really want that? Sometimes it's good to be protected. Just like when if I don't know if you have any children of your own, but a lot of times when we raise our children, there's certain realities that will happen to them that we keep them protected from. We don't tell them about. I remember this one story. I'm not a big alcohol drinker, so I forgot to tell my daughter about liquor stores. I just never mentioned them. I never go into them, so I never mentioned them. One time she was out with her friends when she was a teenager, and they were joking, saying, "Hey, let's go to this liquor store." She had no idea what it was, and they just laughed at her and laughed at her because she was completely clueless as what a liquor store was. But these are the things you protect your children from, and it's a naivety that's important to keep them from growing up too fast and experiencing sometimes the cruel, mean things that are in the world. So
Yeah.
adoptees are sometimes, when they're adopted, are protected from that by their adoptive parents as to who they might have been or who they were. Just imagine if you were the child of a mass murderer or something. You didn't know that. Do you really want to know that?
Yeah.
That might affect who you think you are. What if I'm a mass murderer? What if I have that gene in me? What if I have this proclivities? It'd be better if you didn't know, maybe. I don't know. It's not my
Yeah.
decision to make, but
Tricky one.
yeah, those are the things that happen.
It's a tricky one. I did speak to an adoptee recently who emailed me to say that he found the show useful, which is great. I got on the phone with him, a Zoom call with him, and he told me that he was a product of rape. And do you want to know? Who knows? I mean, like, would you rather have not known? I mean, the whole thing is like, we've got. I heard something pretty profound last week, which is, we look at the word understanding, right? So understanding is the end of thinking. We don't need to go over it. Like we've it's like having a thorn in our side that we've been trying to dig out, and then once the thorn's gone, it's gone, and then there's a relief that the thorn's out of the way. And that's what understanding is, isn't it? Because as we've got as we've had all these questions, that people say the truth will set you free. Well, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But the truth will set you free. But the truth may lead to a pause.
It could be a Pandora's box for all you know. Yeah,
we don't know, and that's why the dogmatic one, yes or no, is such a tricky one, to play. Going back to I'm thinking about the questions, that questioning mind, and it's satiated when we get to the truth. But then, okay, so we've got the name of our birth mother, and we're thinking, okay, so this is going to sort me out once and for all, and that expectations thing. And you talked earlier on about being prepared for all eventualities. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of,
yeah. You can't be prepared for all of them, but you be prepared for a lot of them. You just say, okay, what's the worst case scenario? What is the best case scenario? What's as many cases between those two things can I think of? And you be prepared for those, because it is really, again, I'm not very emotional. I'm not emotionally driven. I'm more of a data analyst type person. A reality here's black and white. And so emotions already hit me harder than a lot of people because I don't process them as well. I know that. I get that about myself. And so when emotional things happen, I have to figure out how to handle them. And so realizing these things is, for example, let's see, there was times in my life I felt like, well, that's not my mom, even though she birthed biologically. I even told one of my sisters, like, she doesn't care. She wouldn't have cared about me. And I just start telling myself stories that aren't true to try to reconcile my emotions with my logic. And I had to let it go. It's like, okay, she is who she is. It happened what happened, and just let it go. So
yeah. I mean, we all tell ourselves stories, don't we, that aren't true, and other people call those things beliefs. We don't, in the adoptee world, we don't hear the word belief a lot, isn't it? Everything's about trauma,
Right.
Which I've been saying this to a couple of people because it's on my mind. I've said this in a couple of interviews recently. Like trauma sounds like it's something that's really tough to fix, whereas beliefs, they somehow feel a little bit more
Malleable. They're malleable.
Yeah. And people will say, what's the word? Neuroplasticity. So our brains are made to change. Well, that sounds really tricky. So what I'm going to have to do? Going to open up my skull and put some, like it's Play-Doh, right?
Right.
But what they're talking about is belief changes. So what are some of the beliefs that have gone out of your head along your journey?
Well, again, my biological mom was from she was a simple Kentuckian, lived in Kentucky. So she's pretty simple, probably had I think she had like an 8th grade education. But there's different kinds of intelligence. Obviously, you can be intelligent without even taking schooling. And she was definitely wise. You could tell. I was heard about all her different decisions. So if I want to focus on, like, I say, well, I came from a young hillbilly mom that didn't know what she's doing. That could be a story I told myself. But the reality was she was wise in her own things she did. So you have to be careful not to tell your too many stories. And then my biological dad was 6, came directly from Germany in 1952. So I'm basically a 2nd-generation German, which I didn't realize. So all these different realities came, and these things that I had to adjust to are interesting. So I'm still adjusting to them, finding about my heritage and who I was. And some people can deny that, say, oh, okay, I'm not that person. Well, you are, but you aren't. So
yeah. So what helps you adjust?
What helps me adjust? Obviously, I'm a creative, so I like writing, I like painting, I like doing different things. I live in a forest. I take care of chickens and ducks. I just live a basic life. A life to me, when I look at things, they're beautiful. So I try to keep from looking at things that aren't beautiful, because that will get me in a negative place. I consider myself, and most adoptees probably do, go through bouts of depression. Sometimes we don't even know why. Some of us fix that by pills. Some of us fix it by counseling. I fixed mine by trying to make my world around me as beautiful as possible. So,
yeah. So it sense, I'm getting a sense that you created that identity, and now you're creating, and for the last 4 years you've been creating a life.
right,
A lifestyle. You're creating like, as you say, you're creating the surroundings where you feel most.
Right. I call it building and maintaining peace. I tell this people, it's like a philosophy I constantly tell people. It's like, you can get peace. Like, somebody can come in your house, say, hey, you want a brand new garden? We're going to put in a pond and these flowers and everything. But if they walk away and you do nothing with it, it's all going to die and get overgrown. You have to maintain peace. So I build my peace and then I maintain it. So that's what I'm trying to do. And that keeps me from having to go to counseling or having to take drugs that help me from being depressed or seeing those things. So that's what I'm doing.
That's what you do.
And with the books as well, the books allow me to express myself in different ways. Like books, I'm a multi-genre author, so I write fiction, nonfiction, biographies. I write it all, not just one style. So,
yeah. And presumably, you said you're a data analyst by profession, so that's your day job, but your passion is the writing.
It was my day job. I'm now a full-time author, so I got into the place where I had a little bit of money, and we bought this place and everything else, and so it's really minimal to maintain. Mortgage is paid for. We have a well. We have what else is there? Oh, septic. So you don't have all these bills that you normally would have in the city. So we moved out in the middle of nowhere to have the more of a simple life.
Yeah.
I know it's not always possible, but that's what I needed to do. So
I mean that, and yeah. So often, I was listening to one of my mentors last week. He talked about a description. A description becomes a prescription, right? So he was actually talking about AA and Bill W's 12-step program, whatever. When he created that, Bill W, he was creating a historical account of the steps that he took. it was a description.
Right.
And now it's become a prescription. So obviously, we're not saying to listeners, now you need to do what Rod's done, and
No,
we're not saying that.
there,
But
there
you've
is a
done stuff that's right
commonality.
for you.
The commonality, what seems like with adoptees, though, if you want to get somewhere beyond this trauma, this primal wound, you have to start rebuilding who you are, whether it's bits and pieces of who your influences or whatever it is. You need to start rebuilding. Otherwise, you're stuck being this, which is, I think, this is the wound of adoptees. As I said before, our personhood. Our personhood is damaged. Who are we as a person? Somebody for some reason got rid of us, and we had to start over. We don't have this heritage. We don't have this long heritage that a lot of people have. They can't look back on the family tree and say this. A lot of times we don't know. I finally got both my adoptive parents or adoptive family and my biological families on both sides. I've traced their genes all the way back to like 680 AD. I've got them way back for, because I'm also, again, a data analyst. I like to do genealogy. So I got them way back from both of them.
Wow, wow.
So
So there's the two things that are coming out to me is this sort of creation and integration.
right.
That create, so yeah, creating your own identity, then having this big the big epiphany moment, and the ongoing changes with the birth family, and then creating the lifestyle. So it was almost as if the identity came first and the life came second, when most people are probably trying to do it the other way around.
Right. And that, I think, most organically, obviously non-adopted kids or people, that's how the other way around, like you said, but we have to do it this way around. And if there's lots of adoptees that don't get to that point. So they're struggling all their life to trying to figure out who they are. And I feel sorry, but what they need to give up some of the stuff if they want to get to this other step. I think at least that's from my perspective.
Yeah.
I feel sorry they're struggling so much.
Yeah. The things coming back to me on this is from a coach I had, and this was a business coach, not an adoption coach or therapist one. She talked about the difference between I want to have, do, be, right? So what do I want to have? How do I need to do? What do I need to do? And how will this help me be? I'm doing it the way around. All right, be, do, have. So who do I want to be? What do I want to do? And then what's that going to give me? What's the outcome?
Right.
And we're back to that kind of idea that Jim Carrey is saying, well, I wish everybody could be rich and famous, so they realize it's not all cracked up to be.
Right. And then possible in that B part, you have to realize that there's some parts of you, I think they call it the nurture nature concept. There's parts of you who are unchangeable. That's just who you are. I don't care whether you're adopted, not adopted, whatever influences, whatever experiences you had, that is just part of who you are. And at some point along the way, you might realize some of those. You may not realize all of them. Sometimes other people realize them. Oh, you have this little thing you always do. Like, I didn't know I did that. Yes, you always do that. And so in that B part you're talking about, you have to realize sometimes you don't get to construct that part. It's just who you are.
Yeah.
So
I heard this phrase a while ago, a few weeks ago now, I think maybe, called psychological identity. And I thought, well, that's the bit that's if anything's damaged, right? If anything is wounded, that's the bit of us that is wounded. This psychological identity, right?
Exactly.
That's wounded. But then I came off the back of that. I thought, well, our psychological identity, that doesn't actually feel to me that that's what I am or what we are.
Right. And that's your statement about you, even though we're wrong, we're not wrong. So we're having.
Yeah. So there's the statement was around our story, right? So one of the big things that was transformative for me, and yet I still fall foul of this, right? I still fall foul. So 14 years ago, I went on a retreat and I separated. And the retreat was essentially 5 days on separating who we are from our story. It separated us from our story, and it separated us from the story in our head.
Right.
And the story, and this wasn't adoptees. I was the only adoptee. So yeah.
Right. It's in general, it does happen to all people. There's a general story or narrative we all tell, whether I don't care whether you're adopted or not adopted, it's who you tell yourself you are. A lot of times people say, I don't want to be like my parents, for one example. And some people are even embarrassed of their parentage or their family, and they hide that stuff. So, and outside their family, they're completely, you're part of that family. You don't seem like that part of that family at all. That happens. I'm not saying negative or positive, it just happens.
Yeah. So our story isn't ourself, and
right.
our psychological identity isn't ourself either.
Right.
To me. To me.
But there are parts of you, like I said, who you just are. I don't care who you're raised by, what influence you've had. That's who you are.
Yeah.
Sometimes getting into that, I get accused a lot of times of being too much in my mind, overthinking things. But that's what an analyst does. They overthink things, all the possibilities and consequences and contingencies. And that's what I do, and that's the reason I got into that field. So
yeah. I heard something a couple of months ago about how lawyers plan their case, especially I don't know whether this is prosecution or defense. I'm not sure which. Anyway, but basically they get a big sheet down of a paper, and they draw it out to like a decision tree.
Right.
I'm gonna ask them a yes no question. Right. If
that happens to do this,
yes,
condition.
yeah. And it's all treed out, and then they've spent a day, 2 days, 3 weeks, whatever it is, and then they've got their master plan.
Right.
They've got their master plan,
so they know where to go with you. And see, I do programming as a data analyst. I do a lot of programming, and so exactly, you'd think, hey, data analyst knows a lot about numbers. I'm really horrible with math, but I'm really good at. In school they used to, I don't know if they did in England, but in America, we'd have to analyze sentence structure. Here's a verb, here's a preposition. I guess they do that in
I don't know, I can't remember.
Okay, well, they did here in America a lot back in my day. And so when I program, that's how I think. And so I think in conditions. If this happens, that happens, do this. So it's all about a contingency. So therefore, when I said really, you got to be ready when you're getting ready to reunion, you got to be ready for almost anything. Obviously, you can't think of them all, but you got to be ready for different things. Otherwise, you're going to set yourself up for possibly a heartache. I mean, what if you have, okay, say, let's say hypothetically, you meet your mom, your birth mom, she's fine, but then you have this birth sibling that hates your guts, feels like you're muscling in on, I was raised by a mom. What are you doing here? Are you trying to take my inheritance? For example, I had a story. I located my half brother, which is how I finally got to find my birth father. First question he asked me, are you trying to get an organ from me or money? I'm like, no. What? I mean, that was his question. To me, it was almost like you're stabbing me in the heart. What do you think I am? Because I operate on honor or honesty, and then this person is telling me I'm dishonorable. He doesn't even know me, and he's telling me. But I get that now that a lot of times people are after that. And I was not after that, obviously, at all.
Yeah.
So
I guess that's why I would rather. So you've got a tough external environment, like with these. So it's all to do with our grounding, right? So the stronger we are in our grounding, the more able we're going to be able to cope with what other people throw at us.
Right. And don't wait for somebody else to ground you. You have to ground yourself somehow.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah. And I guess that's what we're all trying to do. That's what I'm trying to get to, is how to be grounded.
At age 55 and 56.
Yeah.
We're halfway through it. Or more.
But it's almost like, for me, it's the journey to finding who you are, and then the journey to making every behavior align with who you truly are. So one is once and done, and one is never ending.
Right, never ending up to the day you pass on.
Never ending.
No.
It's never ending. But there's two steps. There's two steps on the path. One is, well, chapter one, end of chapter one, and then there's an infinite number of chapters after the end of it, right?
Right.
That's what it feels like to me. But it's that in terms of us finding out.
My birth sister, one thing she said, she has 3 children. She said, you know, until I met you, I would never read when you read stories to your kids, a lot of times it says, and happy ever after. She said, I would never read that part because she says, I don't believe in that. Things are never happily ever after. There's some, it doesn't mean it won't be happy, but it might not be ever after. So because I'd never read that part to him. So until we got together, because now she feels like if she dies tomorrow, it's complete. It's happily ever after. And that's where I am too. So
yeah. Wow. A good point to finish on there. So as always, listeners, check out the show notes, find out what Rod's doing, and which book is your favorite one from an adoption perspective?
From adoption perspective, well, this one's probably not good. It's kind of more like a biography, so I wouldn't recommend that. But for somebody who's going to try to get to this mindset that you and I are talking about, I actually wrote another book called The Universe, which basically just talks about how what seems like apparent coincidences aren't, with that determinism we were talking about, how things come together in a certain way. You're like, oh, all these things that happened seem too coincidental to be random. So I think that's a good jumping point. And maybe then if you want to get to the adopter, so it's called The Universe.
Okay. So there's a link in that to the show notes, guys. Thanks a lot, Rod, and really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks. We'll speak to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.